All right, let's dive into a really fascinating and, frankly, kind of a radical idea from the philosopher Albert Camus. What if true happiness isn't about finally winning or escaping the daily grind? What if it's found smack in the middle of the struggle itself?
You know this feeling, right? The alarm goes off, the day starts, and it just feels like you're pushing the same boulder up the same hill over and over again. It's the commute, the emails, the chores, that endless looping cycle.
And this is the wild question Albert Camus wants us to ask. What if we've been looking at this whole thing completely backward? What if the meaning we're all so desperately searching for isn't waiting for us at the top of the hill, but is actually found in the act of pushing?
To really get this, we need to meet our guide for this journey, a guy named Sisyphus. So, in Greek mythology, the gods condemned him to an eternity of pointless work. He had to push a giant boulder up a mountain, and just as he'd get to the top, he'd have to watch it roll all the way back down, every single time. For Camus, Sisyphus, well, he's us.
And Sisyphus is the perfect symbol for what Camus called the absurd. It's this fundamental clash, you see. We humans are wired to look for meaning, for purpose, for some grand reason for it all. But we're looking for it in a universe that is just silent. It's completely indifferent to our questions.
And that brings us to this absolutely baffling statement that Camus drops at the very end of his essay. Happy? How in the world could a man who is doomed to a meaningless eternal task possibly be happy? I mean, it sounds crazy, right? This is the paradox we're going to unpack.
So, when we're faced with this feeling of absurdity, how do we usually react? Well, Camus argues that our go-to responses are all just different forms of escape. And you know what? He says they're all traps.
He basically lays out two main escape routes. First, there's literal suicide, just ending your life to get away from it all. But the second one, and this is the one most of us are tempted by, is what he calls philosophical suicide. This is when we take a leap of faith into some big belief system. Could be a religion, a political ideology, or even just this blind hope that things have to get better. Anything that denies the absurd and promises some ultimate meaning. But for Camus, both of these are just giving up. They're basically admitting that life as it is just too awful to be faced head-on.
Okay, so if we can't escape, then what are we supposed to do? This is the turning point in his whole argument. Camus says instead of surrendering, we have to fight back. We have to defy our fate.
He says the only truly honest way to live in this absurd world is with three things: revolt, freedom, and passion. Revolt means you refuse to accept the meaninglessness of it all. Freedom is about realizing that, hey, if there's no cosmic plan, then we are completely free to create our own values. And passion? That means living life to the absolute fullest, soaking up every experience you can, precisely because this is all we've got.
Which, of course, brings us right back to that core puzzle. How can Sisyphus, our absurd hero, accept his fate, this eternal, pointless task, and yet defy it at the exact same time? How can he look at that stupid boulder, know it's all for nothing, and still find a reason to give it a shove?
And here it is. This is where we get the big revelation. The happiness Camus is talking about isn't the kind you find at the finish line. It's a completely different kind of happiness, one you discover right in the middle of the race.
The secret, the absolute key, is to completely shift our focus. So instead of always looking ahead for some big payoff or a final reward, we have to become enchanted with the present moment. We have to fall in love with the process, not the outcome.
Think about it like meditation, okay? First, you acknowledge the repetition, right? It's just breathing in, breathing out, over and over. But then you start to really focus on the present moment, and you tune everything else out. And that's when you start to discover all these unique little details. You notice that every breath is actually different. The temperature of the air, that little pause between the inhale and the exhale. And by just immersing yourself in that process, you find this deep sense of fulfillment that has absolutely nothing to do with achieving some goal. The struggle of just sitting there and breathing becomes rich and meaningful all by itself.
And this quote just nails Camus' point about Sisyphus. He imagines Sisyphus getting so absorbed in his task that he notices everything: the texture of the rock against his hands, the strain in his muscles, the way the sun feels on his back. In that moment of complete immersion, his pointless task actually becomes a rich, full world of experience.
And that brings us to the ultimate payoff. Sisyphus doesn't need to get the rock to the top for his life to matter. The effort, the focus, the sheer defiance of it all, that experience, the struggle itself, that is enough to completely fill a human heart.
So what does all this mean for us, living here in the 21st century and not in some old Greek myth? Well, it actually offers a pretty profound kind of freedom from all the pressures of our modern world.
I mean, think about it. We're constantly being told we need to be busy, to be more productive, to achieve more, to win at the game of life. This endless pressure to rack up points on some imaginary scoreboard, that's our modern version of philosophical suicide. We're so busy chasing a win that we forget to actually live.
But here's the harsh and honestly kind of beautiful truth. The universe is completely indifferent. It's not keeping score. It doesn't care if you get the promotion, buy the dream house, or get 1 million followers. The value of your life does not depend on being labeled a winner.
And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. If life doesn't demand that you win, if the struggle itself is truly enough to fill your heart, does that mean you are finally free? Free from all that pressure, free from the need to constantly prove your worth, and just free to become enchanted with the moments of your one absurd and incredibly precious life?